London 2012. The Olympic Stadium pulsed like a living heartbeat beneath the night sky, its towering lights casting a golden glow over the massive crowd of 90,000 fans packed shoulder to shoulder. It was one of those rare evenings where the air itself seemed to hum, thick with history, electricity, and the unshakable promise that something unforgettable was about to happen. Stevie Wonder was closing the night, and the stadium vibrated with anticipation as the band launched into the opening groove of Superstition. Tens of thousands of voices roared in unison, and the ground trembled beneath the stomping of feet. But in the midst of that explosive energy, somewhere down in the VIP accessibility section, a tiny heartbeat quietly pulsed, a heartbeat belonging to a blind 5-year-old child who had waited his whole life for this moment. His name was Elliott Greene, a small boy with dark curly hair, oversized headphones, and hands that never stopped moving because he felt music instead of seeing it. Elliott had been blind since birth, but rhythm was his world. He tapped on tables, he drummed on walls, he hummed melodies in hospital rooms, and every night his mother played Stevie Wonder to lull him to sleep. Tonight, she had brought him here, believing simply that he deserved to hear Stevie live at least once. She had no idea that fate had placed her son on a collision course with a moment the world would talk about for years. Elliott sat against the barrier, gripping a tiny toy keyboard in his lap, bouncing with excitement every time the band hit a new chord. "Mama," he whispered, "I can feel the music." And he could, every vibration rolling through the concrete, every cheer shaking the air around him, every drum hit thumping through his heartbeat. Up on stage, Stevie was in his element, laughing, riffing, teasing the crowd as he moved through the song's iconic groove. But suddenly, mid-verse, he paused. Not the casual pause of a performer catching his breath. This was something else. He lifted his head, sensing something in the sea of bodies. His smile softened, his hands stilled on the keys. The band instinctively faded out behind him. 90,000 people fell into a confused silence, the sudden break in the music slicing through the stadium like a strange kind of magic. Stevie raised a hand, turning toward the side of the stage closest to the accessibility section. "There's a little brother out there," he said gently, his voice echoing across the massive venue. "I can feel him." The spotlight swept across the stands and then stopped, right on Elliott. The boy froze. His mother covered her mouth. And in that impossible, breathtaking moment, Stevie Wonder paused. Superstition, for a blind child who didn't even know the spotlight was shining on him. The stadium vibrated with confusion and awe as the spotlight lingered on the tiny shape of Elliott, his small body perched at the front of the accessibility section, hands frozen in mid-air as if the music had stopped inside his chest, too. His mother, Danielle, stood beside him trembling, one hand pressed to her lips, the other gripping Elliott's shoulder so gently it looked more like a prayer than a touch. Elliott tilted his head, sensing the sudden stillness, the way 90,000 voices had fallen utterly silent at once. "Mama, what happened?" he whispered. His voice was soft, frightened, unsure. Danielle struggled to speak, tears already rising. "Baby, Stevie just stopped the music. He stopped for you." Elliott's small lips parted, confusion flickering across his face. He didn't understand how a man standing so far away could feel him, but Stevie could, and Stevie did. Up on stage, Stevie took a slow step toward the front, his hand outstretched as if reaching through the darkness between them. "Little brother," he called gently, speaking directly to the section where Elliott sat. "I see you. I hear. You come here." Gasps erupted across the stadium. A wave of emotion rippled from one end of the arena to the other as people turned to watch the tiny boy who had somehow stopped a global music icon in the middle of one of his biggest songs. A security guard approached Danielle cautiously, headset buzzing with frantic instructions. "Ma'am," he whispered, eyes soft. "Mr. Wonder is asking for him." Danielle nodded, unable to speak, and lifted Elliott carefully from his seat. "You're going to meet Stevie," she whispered into his ear, her voice cracking. Elliott's breath hitched, his small fingers gripping her shirt with trembling intensity. "Mama, is it really him?" She nodded. "Yes, baby, it's him." The guard reached out, and Elliott's tiny hand slid into his. They moved slowly through the aisle, the guard clearing a path as the crowd stepped aside in reverent silence. People pressed their hands to their hearts. Some reached out to touch Elliott's shoulder as he passed, tears spilling down their cheeks. Others whispered blessings, encouragements, quiet sobs of disbelief. The stadium, moments ago a roaring ocean of sound, had transformed into a cathedral of breathless anticipation. Elliott clutched his toy keyboard to his chest, his other hand gripping the guards tightly as he took each timid step toward the stage. "Mama, I'm scared," he whispered. Danielle followed closely behind, voice trembling. "I'm right here, sweetheart. You're okay." When Elliott reached the stairs leading up to the stage, Stevie stepped forward again, raising his hand, as if guiding him with nothing but instinct. The entire stadium leaned closer, hearts thundering in the chests of 90,000 strangers, all watching a blind 5-year-old climb into a moment he never could have imagined. Elliott reached the first step, his small foot hesitating as he felt the unfamiliar rise beneath him. The security guard steadied him with a gentle hand, but before he could help any further, Stevie lifted his arm in a slow, deliberate motion, wordless but commanding. "Let him come," Stevie said softly. The band stood frozen behind him. 90,000 people held their breath. Danielle's hands trembled as she hovered just inches behind her son, ready to catch him if his little legs wobbled. Elliott lifted his foot again, feeling the edge, testing the height, then climbed. One step, then another. His tiny fingers brushed the air in front of him, searching for something to hold, something familiar, and then they found it. Stevie had walked forward and extended his hand. Elliott's fingertips brushed Stevie's palm, and the boy froze. "Hi," Elliott whispered, his voice barely a breath. Stevie smiled, lowering himself to one knee. "Hey, little brother." The words swept through the stadium like a warm wind, melting every heart in the building. Stevie curled his fingers around Elliott's hand, steady and gentle, guiding him the last few steps until the boy stood directly in front of him beneath the blinding glow of the spotlight. Elliott lifted his face toward Stevie, not seeing him, but feeling him, his warmth, his presence, his voice. "Are you really Stevie Wonder?" he asked in the softest, most earnest tone imaginable. The entire stadium folded inward, overcome. Stevie let out a soft laugh and brushed a thumb over Elliott's knuckles. "Yes, little brother, and I hear you loud and clear." Elliott's lower lip trembled. "I listen to you every night," he whispered, "even when I'm hurting." Stevie's smile softened into something deeper, something reverent. He placed a hand over Elliott's heart. "I know," he murmured. "I felt you." Danielle covered her mouth, collapsing into tears. People in the stands wept openly, clutching each other, overwhelmed by the tenderness of the moment. Stevie slowly lifted his microphone from its stand and placed it gently into Elliott's hands. The boy gasped, clutching it as though someone had handed him the entire world. The metal was cold against his palms, heavier than he expected. He pressed it close to his chest, his breath trembling. "For me?" he whispered. Stevie nodded. "For you." The stadium erupted in a wave of soft anguish, gasps, sobs, hands thrown over hearts. Stevie rested both of his hands on Elliott's shoulders, grounding him as he spoke. "Whenever you're ready," Stevie said softly. "Let me hear your first note." Elliott swallowed hard, his tiny body trembling. He lifted the microphone, searching for the courage he didn't know he had, and as 90,000 people leaned forward in breathless silence, a fragile little voice prepared to sing into the largest moment of its young life. Elliott stood frozen beneath the spotlight, the microphone shaking like a living thing between his small hands. The sheer size of the stadium, the breath of 90,000 people, the weight of the moment pressed against him like a giant unseen wave. His little chest rose and fell in sharp, trembling bursts. Stevie kept one steadying hand on his shoulder, grounding him with warmth and presence. "Take your time," Stevie whispered, so softly that only Elliott could hear. "Don't rush, just breathe." Elliott did. He inhaled with a tiny shudder, his fingers tightening around the mic as he drew in the courage he didn't know he possessed. The stadium remained impossibly silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Danielle stood off to the side, hands covering her face, her entire body shaking as she watched her son take the biggest breath of his life. Then Elliott opened his mouth. A sound emerged, small, quivering, delicate enough to shatter the hardest heart. It wasn't a word. It wasn't even a full note, more like the ghost of one, a fragile whisper of melody shaped by a child who lived more through feeling than through sight. The sound drifted upward, carrying innocence, fear, hope, and an indescribable tenderness. It wasn't loud enough to fill the stadium, but it didn't have to be. Microphones are powerful, silence is powerful. And when that tiny sound echoed through the speakers, 90,000 people gasped, as if one heartbeat had pulsed through the entire arena. A wave of emotion rippled over the crowd. People clutched each other. Tears spilled instantly. Someone whispered, "Dear God," under their breath. Elliott's small shoulders shook, unsure if he had done something wrong, but Stevie squeezed him gently. "That's it," Stevie whispered. "That's beautiful." Calmed by Stevie's voice, Elliott tried again. This time the sound was clearer, still fragile, but undeniably a note, a tiny piece of soul set free into the air. It hovered above the crowd like a shining thread, impossibly pure. The stadium reacted instantly. A grown man in the front row dropped to his knees. A teenage girl sobbed into her hands. Elderly fans pressed their palms to their chests as if trying to steady their hearts. Stevie added a quiet, gentle hum behind Elliott's note, wrapping the child's trembling sound in warmth, lifting it, holding it, protecting it. Elliott's face softened as he heard Stevie's voice intertwine with his own, like a musical embrace, and the audience understood. This wasn't just a performance, it was a moment of pure humanity, raw, fragile, breathtaking, held in the trembling voice of a blind 5-year-old who had stopped the world simply by trying to sing. Elliott lifted the microphone again, his tiny fingers trembling as he searched the air for the courage Stevie kept whispering into him. The stadium remained a vast ocean of silence, every fan suspended between breaths, afraid that even the smallest sound might break the fragile magic unfolding before them. Elliott inhaled a small, shaky, fluttering breath and released another note. This one carried more shape, more warmth, still trembling but stretching just a little, further than the last. It drifted into the air like a soft beam of light, thin but brave, quivering but unmistakably alive. The crowd reacted instantly. Hands flew to mouths, shoulders shook, people folded into each other as tears rolled down their cheeks. Even in the highest rows, where the stage looked like a distant star, fans felt the note hit them square in the chest. Elliott's voice wasn't strong, but it carried something far more powerful: purity, the kind only a child who has endured more than his small years could ever release. Stevie leaned in slightly, harmonizing with a gentle hum that blended into Elliott's fragile melody like warm water wrapping around cold fingers. He didn't overshadow the boy. He supported him, lifted him, letting Elliott's voice remain the center of the moment. The band stayed frozen behind them, instruments lowered, their eyes shining with disbelief. No one wanted to interrupt this tiny miracle. Elliott heard Stevie's hum, felt it vibrating through the stage floor, and instinctively let his own sound linger longer. His note wavered, dipped, then floated upward again as he followed Stevie's lead. The moment felt impossibly tender, like watching a baby bird take its first trembling flight. Danielle stood side stage, hands shaking violently as she whispered, "You can do it, baby. You can do it." Her tears falling faster with every small sound her son released. Then Elliott did something no one expected. He clutched his toy keyboard tighter, lifted his chin ever so slightly and let out a third note, longer, clearer, rising with a small swell of courage. It cracked halfway through, but the crack made the stadium erupt even harder into tears. People cried openly now. Some reached for strangers' arms. Others bent forward, hands pressed to their knees, overwhelmed by emotion they could not contain. And when Elliott's note finally faded into the cold night air, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was reverent. It was sacred. It was the sound of 90,000 hearts breaking and healing at the same time. Stevie closed his eyes, his face tilted upward as though receiving something divine. That, he whispered into the mic, his voice trembling with awe, was magic, little brother. And everyone in the stadium felt it, felt that they had just witnessed something they would carry inside them for the rest of their lives. Elliott's breathing grew quicker, each inhale, trembling through his tiny frame, as though his body was trying to keep up with a moment far bigger than he could understand. Stevie sensed it immediately. He placed his warm, steady hand on the boy's back, rubbing gently in slow, grounding circles. "You're doing so good," Stevie whispered, voice barely above a breath, but amplified through the speakers like a blessing. The reassurance settled into Elliott's chest, like warmth spreading through cold fingers. He held the microphone tighter, drawing strength from Stevie's presence, from the silent devotion of 90,000 strangers, from the soft thrum of music still humming in the stage beneath his shoes. Slowly, he lifted his chin. Slowly, he opened his mouth once more, and what emerged next made the stadium buckle with emotion. It was a note, still small, still trembling, but this time there was something new inside it, a tiny flicker of confidence, a quiet kind of bravery. The sound danced upward, unsteady, yet determined, carrying all the wonder and innocence of a child who didn't know how powerful he truly was. Stevie joined him again, just a whisper of harmony, just enough to cradle Elliott's note without taking it away. The blend of their voices drifted across the stadium like a warm breeze, sweeping over a sea of frozen hearts. People clung to each other, overwhelmed by the sheer tenderness in the air. A woman in the middle rows sobbed loudly into her scarf. A father lifted his teenage son into a tight embrace, shaking. In the upper decks, fans wiped their faces with sleeves and jacket collars. Even those who couldn't fully see the stage felt the emotion radiating from it, the purity, the fragility, the courage. Elliott held the note as long as his tiny lungs allowed, then let it fall into silence like a feather drifting to the ground. The quiet that followed did not break the moment. It deepened it. It sanctified it. Then, in an instinct born from something deeper than thought, Elliott leaned into Stevie's side, pressing his forehead softly against Stevie's shoulder. The stadium broke. Sobs echoed from every direction. Stevie wrapped an arm around the little boy, pulling him close in a tender embrace that felt too intimate, too powerful, too human for a venue as enormous as the Olympic Stadium. "I'm right here," Stevie whispered, kissing the top of Elliott's curls. "You're not alone." The boy nodded against him, his small body trembling not with fear this time, but with the overwhelming weight of being held, seen, cherished, in front of the entire world. The lights dimmed further, softening into a warm halo around them. And in that glow, Stevie lifted the microphone to his own lips and murmured, "London, this little brother has something inside him the world needs to hear." 90,000 people erupted, not in noise but in tears, in awe, in love. And Elliott, breathing hard, lifted the mic again, ready to try once more. Elliott lifted the microphone with both hands this time, as if holding something sacred. His little shoulders rose with a trembling inhale, and the entire stadium leaned forward, 90,000 bodies forming one silent, beating heart. Stevie stayed crouched beside him, one protective arm wrapped around the boy's back, steadying him with the warmth of a father, a mentor, a guardian. Elliott opened his mouth, and the moment his note slipped out, the stadium shattered. It wasn't loud, it wasn't polished, but it was pure, achingly, breathtakingly pure. The sound floated upward like a small lantern rising into the night sky, fragile yet determined, glowing with a quiet defiance against the darkness. The note cracked, wavered, caught itself, then rose again, surprising even Elliott with its strength. And the world, every fan in that stadium, broke into tears. People sobbed openly now, no longer trying to hide the raw emotion tearing through them. Some clutched their chests, others covered their faces with shaking hands. A man in the front row fell back into his seat, overwhelmed, whispering, "Oh my God!" A woman pressed her forehead to the railing, shoulders shaking uncontrollably. Even Even the security guards along the barricade wiped their eyes, unable to pretend the moment wasn't affecting them. Elliott held the note as long as he could, his small body trembling with effort, and when he finally let go, the silence that followed was so heavy it felt like the stadium itself was holding its breath. Stevie raised his microphone slowly, his voice thick with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said softly, "you just heard a miracle." The arena exploded. The crowd rose as one, 90,000 people standing to their feet in a roar so powerful it shook the metal beams of the Olympic Stadium. The applause thundered like rolling waves, crashing again and again as people cried, screamed, laughed, broke open in pure awe. Stevie lifted Elliott into his arms, holding him high enough for the entire stadium to see. The boy's toy keyboard dangled from his wrist, bouncing gently as Stevie cradled him close. Elliott rested his head on Stevie's chest, exhausted, overwhelmed, but glowing with a joy so big it seemed to spill from his tiny body into the air around him. Stevie kissed the top of his curls and whispered into the mic, "This little brother just reminded us what music really is." The crowd roared louder. Fireworks began to spark. In the distance, lighting the sky with colors that Elliott would never see, but he felt every vibration, every cheer, every heartbeat of the moment. And as Stevie carried him gently off stage, the stadium still shaking with applause, Elliott Greene, 5 years old, blind, fragile, brave beyond measure, left behind a moment the world would never forget. As Stevie disappeared backstage carrying Elliott in his arms, the thunder of the stadium still roared behind them, waves of applause, crashing and rising, refusing to fade. The moment they slipped past the curtain, Elliott clung tighter to Stevie's shirt, overwhelmed by everything he had just felt. Danielle rushed toward them, tears streaming, her hands trembling as she reached for her son. Stevie gently transferred Elliott into her embrace, his touch soft, slow, reverent. Danielle fell to her knees, hugging her child with a desperation and gratitude that words could never hold. "Baby, baby, you did it," she whispered through sobs, pressing kisses to his forehead. Elliott wrapped his little arms around her neck, whispering, "Mama, I sang. I really sang." The sentence broke her completely. She cried into his shoulder, her body shaking as Stevie rested a hand on her back. Around them, the band members gathered slowly, their eyes red, their faces stunned. A guitarist leaned against the wall, wiping his cheeks with both hands. A backing vocalist pressed a hand over her heart, whispering, "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Even veteran stagehands, men who had worked hundreds of shows, seen thousands of crowds, stood motionless, shaken by the sheer purity of what had unfolded. Stevie remained quiet, his hand still resting gently on Elliott's head as the child lay against his mother's chest, his breath slowing, his body relaxing after pouring out every